Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Dan Labbe, Mary Kay Cabot, Ashley Bastock with you here. The normal disclaimer, recording this on Thursday. It's 4:30. And we're going to start, I guess, with the big NFL news of the day and a guy that we've talked about a lot on this podcast, and that is John Harbaugh. We talked about him a little bit on our Wednesday pod and mentioned that it sort of felt like things were trending towards him going to the Giants. They always seemed like the front runner. A lot of the reporting about that meeting, it sure felt like he was maybe going to sign a contract. And then, of course, late last night, very early this morning, we find out that there was an agreement, and John Harbaugh is going to be the next head coach of the New York Giants. Mary Kay, when he first became available, right, every team that had an opening, and the Browns were one of those teams, had to make that phone call to John Harbaugh. For whatever reason, he kind of got fixated on that Giants job. He never really met with any other teams once all was said and done. So obviously the Browns never really got that opportunity to make their pitch. Did you think, I guess, are you surprised that it went so quickly that he didn't even give any other teams a chance?
No, because we had been seeing and hearing that the Giants were going to put on the full court press. They didn't want to let him out of the building. And also they have something that is very attractive to John Harbaugh, and that is an up-and-coming quarterback in Jackson Dart. And he even received a phone call from Brian Daboll, former Browns offensive coordinator, former Giants head coach, who strongly endorsed Jackson Dart and thought those two guys would be a good fit for each other. So quarterback is huge in these equations. And that is just something that the Browns don't have to offer right now, is a certain quarterback outlook or picture. And that probably isn't necessarily going to be a huge selling point for them throughout this process.
Yeah, and Ashley, for a guy like Harbaugh, who, obviously coming from Baltimore, he's in his 60s, like, he doesn't want to wait around. He wants to go to a situation where it's like, I can start winning right away. I know it sounds weird to say that about the Giants, but if he believes in that quarterback and he believes in they've got some pieces on that defense, especially on that defensive front. If he believes in all of that, and he does that John Harbaugh thing, that team can get to winning pretty quickly if Jackson Dart can stay healthy and stay out of that blue medical tent.
Yeah, I mean, I think really of the teams with openings, the Giants had one of the more advantageous quarterback positions right now. I say that, and it obviously depends on what you think of Cam Ward as well. But I think for everyone who watched both of those teams this year, the Giants are less of a project than the Titans are going to be. And look, even less than like Miami is going to be. So for me, that's why it just sort of makes sense. Like it's one of those things where what a head coach candidate is looking for, the Giants can offer. And I think when you look at it that way, it makes sense why this went so quickly.
Yeah, the more like you think about the Giants, of course, they have Malik Neighbors as well. He'll be coming back. Cam Scatteraboo will be coming back. There's just some pieces there that I think you can sit down and say, this is what it could look like when all these guys are healthy, when it's rolling. It seems like he's going to bring Todd Monken along to be his offensive coordinator. So, if that offense is rolling the way it's supposed to. And Mary Kay, not even just at the quarterback position for the Browns, it is all sort of like, the thing the Browns have to sell is the ability to maybe acquire some of these pieces, but they don't have a lot of them yet on that offensive side of the ball. Obviously, they have like Harold Fannin, Quinshon Judkins is good, but they don't have those explosive, dynamic playmakers across the board yet that even the Giants can offer. That's kind of their goal this offseason. I could understand why that might be something that would be a hard sell to somebody like John Harbaugh.
Yeah, I think that, as we've all said and written, that the obvious sell for this football team is that elite defense, right? So everybody knows that they have that. But what we don't know is, what are they telling them about the quarterback situation? What are their expectations about the quarterback situation? And if they are encouraging teams or coaches, candidates, rather, that they would really like Shedeur Sanders to start the season, I just wonder how that is impacting some of these interviews. When you have an experienced coach like John Harbaugh, is he going to look at that and say, that isn't going to work for me? Or, hey, that's great. So, we don't really know what's going on behind closed doors in that regard. But, but that could be a factor here with some of these more experienced coaches. If they think that that's what they're going to have to work with next year, they have to decide if they can get to winning with a young quarterback like that pretty quickly.
Yeah, and it's that unknown of, are you going to be stuck for a year with Shador and Deshaun Watson and Dylan Gabriel? We talked yesterday about the Dante Moore decision, how that kind of impacts the Browns. Are they going to have another third round pick or something in there? It really is just about like. It all comes down to, I mean, we do this podcast every day. We do hundreds of them a year, Ashley, but we could just get on every day and say, hey, it's about the coach and the quarterback, and then call it a day. Sometimes it really does just come down to that.
Sometimes it does. And again, I mean, I think those guys have to be a match, just like your coach and your GM have to be a match. When we talk about quarterback evaluation and it being such an inexact science, like there's just so much truth to that. Like I think about Josh Allen all the time, and like this is one of the biggest like unknown hypotheticals to me, but like would Josh Allen have become Josh Allen if he didn't have Brian Dable working with him? Now Brian Dable wasn't his head coach obviously, but there needs to be somebody there helping a quarterback develop, especially when it's a young quarterback. Get in a system. You have to know your system. You have to know your identity. And you have to have a head coach that really, I think, believes in that guy and believes in that process. So that's why I think the task at hand for the Browns is very, very important. They can't afford to screw it up. And unfortunately for them, it's going to be easier, I think, to screw it up than it's going to be to get it right. Because, I mean, so many teams struggle with this very same thing.
Okay, so Friday is going to be an interesting day for the Browns. This coaching search is going to kind of kick back into gear after a couple of days where it's been relatively quiet, at least for the Browns. Get some interviews, things like that. So let's kind of real quickly just sort of reset where things are, go over some of these candidates. Mary Kay, as you look at this candidate list, as things have started to shake out a little bit, and this doesn't have to be like your favorite guy. This doesn't have to be the guy you want to pick. Maybe it's a guy we just haven't talked about a lot. Is there a guy kind of in this group, though, that sort of has you interested, sort of has you intrigued? Just like, I wonder about that guy.
Well, I'm just going to bring up someone that we really haven't talked very much about yet because the Browns haven't even put in the interview request yet for Chris Shula. But I just figured I would talk about him for a minute because they are expected to put in the request for him as long as everything goes as planned. And in that case, they will be interviewing someone who is in high demand. He's getting requests from pretty much everyone. And he's, once again, a really, really good coordinator coming from an excellent system. And we know he coached for a year at Ashley's alma mater, John Carroll, right? And he's from that whole John Carroll family. He played football against Sean McVay at Miami of Ohio. I mean, with Sean McVay at Miami of Ohio. Those two are really, really good friends. And so he's a great defensive coordinator. And once again, he is coming from more of the 3-4 defense, but these are hybrid fronts that they use. Nobody stays in their base defense anymore. So a lot of times you're in the nickel, a lot of times you're in the dime. They will play multiple fronts, hybrid fronts, but they play more zone than Jim Schwartz does. And they also blitz a lot more than Jim Schwartz does. So a lot of differences. And once again, it's very interesting to see what they're doing here with some of the guys that they are interviewing on the defensive side of the ball. They're all 3-4 guys. They're all sort of from that Vic Fangio style of defense. So I don't know where they're going with that. Like, what exactly are they doing with that? I don't really know. That, that's what Jesse Minter does. That's what Ed and Dirty does. Uh, so it's just different than what Jim is doing. And unless they are actually thinking about changing their defensive philosophy, I'm not sure exactly what this is all about. Unless, of course, they think, okay, these guys are head coach candidates. And if they stick around, if Jim sticks around, they can still run the 4-3 that he runs with the man defense and one high and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I don't know. So Chris Shula was just a name I wanted to throw out there because we haven't really talked about him very much.
Yeah, and like you said, he's one of those guys that's in high demand. He's sort of been on that list of candidates throughout the season. That's like, okay, this guy could be a hot candidate when we get into the coaching cycle, and that of course is happening. And Ashley, this is something we've talked a lot about is how unique this defense is, the way they play. How would a 3-4 guy kind of fit here? Myles Garrett is the best player on that defense. You sort of want to make sure that things are tailored to him. Now, on the flip side of that, you look at sort of what the Rams have done to move on. Aaron Donald retires, and they brought in they brought in young guys, they've drafted guys, they've really rebuilt that defensive front quickly. What Chris Shula has done the last few years has been really impressive to kind of build up that defensive unit and keep it. Obviously, everybody talks about Matt Stafford and Sean McVay in the offense, but that defense has been pretty good. So I don't know what the Browns are thinking either, as far as like these defensive coaches that don't necessarily mesh with the personnel they have or with the defensive coordinator they might want to keep. But just as far as a guy that developed a really nice young defense, Chris Shula fits that mold.
Well, I was watching a Chris Shula 3-4 defense back in 2014 covering John Carroll football. So I have seen glimpses of it before he even got to the NFL level. I'll say it like that. And John Carroll was very good that year when he helped, come in. Obviously, his grandfather Don Shula went to John Carroll. The stadium has their family name on it there. But I will say, like, I am definitely so hesitant about them changing their defensive scheme. Like we don't know what would happen, right? Like if they would hire one of those guys, like to Mary Kay's point, it could be a possibility that Jim Schwartz would stay. They would still run their defense. Nothing would change. But I do think while Andrew Berry said they like to think these players are not scheme specific, I would argue a lot of them kind of are, because I look at that Brown safety room right now and who knows, like maybe they will draft Caleb Downs. I don't trust them to play a ton of too high, right? I look at a guy like Tyson Campbell, who you went out and traded for because he's so good in man and he's obviously not as good in zone. Obviously, you talk about the 3-man front, like that's not really Myles Garrett's style. Like it just would be a big change. And to me, it's like, why are we changing all that when the real issue is the offense and the quarterback and all these roster pieces you don't have? So that to me is the major negative side. I think there are a lot of guys on this defense. However, I think they are very good in the system they are in. And that's the problem with a lot of these top candidates this cycle. Their defenses are just different and they're more zone heavy and there's more too high. So you kind of have to decide, like, if you're the Browns, are you okay with totally changing your defense that has been one of the best in the league over the last 3 years in terms of like these major metrics? Or are you still willing to go that route with a different defensive guy that's not Jim Schwartz, but take your chances and hope Jim Schwartz stays in the building as your coordinator? You don't run that defense and that new head coach is in more of that CEO role. But at that point, I'm like, why don't you just go with a younger offensive guy too?
Yeah, and I'll say like, when I think about like Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward, it's like those guys are going to be fine, right? Like they'll figure out how to fit Myles Garrett in anything. They'll figure out how to fit Denzel Ward in anything. But that safety room is interesting because I think Grant Delpit is coming off probably his best season, and I think a big part of that is they finally just decided like, we're going to put this guy near the line of scrimmage. Like this is what he's going to do. We're going to play into what he's best at, and we're not going to have him back in coverage for a million snaps because that's not when Grant Delpit's at his best. So I think for some smaller pieces like that, Mary Kay, Tyson Campbell, another guy, I do think it has more of an effect on some of those guys. And of course, this team doesn't have unlimited resources to sort of remake certain areas of the ball. They've always got to spend a lot on the offensive side. So I just think that's one of those things you kind of circle is like, okay, no, like you said, nobody's in base anymore. Not all that often. So you can make it up. You can run hybrid stuff. You can do things like that. But you do wonder how it affects some of those guys who aren't like your cornerstone pieces. And does it help them or does it kind of make them revert to having some issues that we saw before Jim Schwartz got here?
Yeah, it's just it will be interesting when we finally get a chance to talk to Andrew Berry again, to talk to him, and maybe they will end up hiring one of these guys, and we'll talk to him about it at that point. But if they don't do that and they stick with Jim either as head coach or defensive coordinator, I'd really like to know what the thinking is behind bringing in these Fangio type of guys. And is it because the Fangio defenses have done such a phenomenal job over the years? And they always do, of course. But I'm just curious to know, does he want to transition towards something like that sometime soon? If not, why are you talking to all these guys? Why are you bringing these guys in that all have that common denominator? A little bit puzzling, not really sure. And maybe they're just good leaders and good guys, and he thinks they would make good head coaches, and that he's not just being scheme specific about them. It's more the leadership qualities of the candidate as opposed to whether they run a 4-3 or a 3-4 or zone or man or 2 high or 1 high or blitz or not. So I'm sure that has something to do with it. And so we'll have to see about that. But yeah, very intrigued. And then just as a matter of updating this, Jesse Minter will be interviewing with the Browns tomorrow, and Nate Scheelhaus will be interviewing with the Browns tomorrow. So that is the Chargers defensive coordinator, and then the Rams pass game coordinator. And then on Saturday, Grant Udinsky is interviewing with the Cleveland Browns. And he, of course, is the Jaguars offensive coordinator. So, so these are the names that are coming in, and then we'll see what happens with Chris Shula. And then one more real quick thing, and that is I heard Andrew Siciliano on the radio yesterday talking about Matt Burke, the Houston Texans defensive coordinator, but I haven't heard anything about the Browns putting in a request for him or getting ready to put in a request for him, but he just did throw that name out there.
Yeah, they were doing like a match, like matching teams with coaches, and he threw like Matt Burke's name sort of out of nowhere. It's a name we haven't really heard until then. So, and anytime you hear somebody associated with the organization like that throw a name out, it's like, wait, what? Okay. But yeah, that's put a little circle around that one, I guess. Ashley, of all these names, whether it's somebody Mary Kay just threw out there, somebody that we've talked about before, whoever, maybe it's Matt Burke. Is there a guy you really want to talk about a little bit here?
Yeah, I was not prepared for a Matt Burke discussion, so I'll hold off on that one. No, I think it's worth talking a bit more about Grant Udinsky because he's one of those names that I feel like is gaining more traction among fans, even like Browns fans seem intrigued about him. So I think it's worth having a longer discussion about him. Of course, he's just turned 30 years old and would be the youngest head coach ever hired if he was to get this job. He just would beat out Sean McVay, who was closer to 31 than 30, but Grant Udinsky just turned 30 like last week. So that's where we're at, but he's just had this sort of meteoric rise, and he came in, with minimal experience, essentially, with first-year head coach Liam Cohen down in Jacksonville. And his reputation has just continued, I think, to precede him. He worked with Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota as well. Mary Kay wrote about this. He's from that Shanahan coaching tree. And I just think he's really fascinating when you talk about, and there's been this chatter about the Browns, like potentially willing to take a chance on a bit more of an unproven guy. And you see why it makes sense, especially if like they're trying to go that Sean McVay path. But why I also think it's interesting, we talked about this a little bit, like him and a guy like Nate Shieldhouse from the Rams, their pass game coordinator, like would this potentially be someone they get in the building another way too? Like, would they be able to offer Udinsky a bit of a title bump here, allow him to call plays? If they did go with a defensive head coach and Shieldhouse, would they want him for that OC job? So those are kind of the two guys that I have circled in the sense of, okay, if they're not head coaches, are we still going to see them in some capacity? But I think of the two, Grant Udinsky's like the most interesting just because we know a little bit more about him in a coordinator role.
Yeah, and I've got to say, if I see that clip of him talking about like a wide receiver sitting down in a zone, if I see that like anymore on my Twitter feed, like it's a great clip. It's fascinating to hear him talk about it. I don't know if I could see that clip on my Twitter feed, 100 more times. But anyway, Udinsky is the other thing that's interesting to me about Udinsky, Mary Kay, is how does he approach this, right? Because, like we mentioned, he's 30 years old. He's been a coordinator for a year. He's in a pretty good spot in Jacksonville. He's working under Liam Cohen. He's got a quarterback who, look, it's not perfect, but you've got a guy that you're kind of figuring it out with. They made the playoffs. They're in a relatively easy-ish division. Obviously, Houston is very good. Indianapolis was very good until Daniel Jones got hurt. So it's not the NFC South, but the AFC South isn't, a juggernaut. So you can still have success there. I wonder if he looks at this and if he says, I can still take my time. So if he looks at this Brown situation and if they were to offer him the head coaching job, as great as that opportunity is, if he maybe says, I don't know if I want to tie myself to that situation where they don't have a quarterback, maybe there isn't a clear quarterback plan, and maybe he doesn't love the guys they have in this building. I think he's a guy that has a little wiggle room to be picky, I guess, a little bit like Ben Johnson was. Stay in Jacksonville, get a little more experience. Maybe Liam Cohen would, sweeten the pot for him a little bit and let him be the play caller or something like that. I think what makes him so interesting isn't just how young he is and, how quickly he's rising, but also he might have the ability to kind of dictate some things a little bit and say, you know what, I'm going to wait another year and I'm going to see what things look like next year. And I'm going to gain another year of experience.
That's right. And when you have some of these young rising stars in the game, the Kevin O'Connells and those kinds of guys, they know that they are going to get head coaching jobs at some point. They're on that track and it's just a matter of time. And they can afford to be choosy because what you're going to hang your hat on is your quarterback. And these guys are going to look at this quarterback situation and they are going to decide if they want it or if they want no part of it right now. And I think that's going to be a determining factor in this search, that these coaches are going to look at this just like perhaps John Harbaugh did and said, okay, maybe the Jackson Dart situation is better for me. And maybe Mike McDaniel will even do that. Or who knows, maybe Mike McDaniel is crazy excited to work with Shador and really wants this job. We really don't know yet. But when you have some of these young guys that you would be hiring them on a leap of faith, they can afford to sit back, take their time a little bit, enjoy the situation that they're in, and then have their pick of the lot in some cases. I mean, he might be the hottest candidate on the market next year. So it'll be interesting to see how some of the young guys that really don't seem to be ready yet, how this whole thing goes with them.
Okay, there's one other guy that I want to talk about, and I just feel like for whatever reason, he's not a guy we've spent a lot of time on. I'll admit he's a candidate that I keep forgetting about, which makes me think he's probably going to be.
Before you say it, I want to try to guess, but
yeah, okay.
I know. I think I know who it is too.
All right, so why don't Mary Kay? Why don't you guess?
Should we write it down on a piece of paper and hold it up?
Yeah, we should. We should write it down and hold it up.
We're going to write it down. I think you guys are going to...
Definitely, we know who it is.
I think you guys are going to get it, but yeah, let's see. Let's see what we've got here. on these pieces of
When do we
paper.
hold it up?
Backwards, but
Go ahead, hold them up when you've got it and see if I can read it. Oh no, Mary Kay, that was somebody I was thinking of. I can't read yours, Ashley. So
Dan
Mary Kay,
Pitcher.
okay. So Mary Kay wrote Tommy Rees, for those of you that aren't watching the video. And
yeah.
Ashley wrote Dan Pitcher. And it was Dan Pitcher that I was thinking of.
All
But
right.
Tommy's a good one too. We should actually
We
spend
have
a little time
Tommy
on
is a
Tommy.
good one.
We have completely forgotten about the offensive
I
coordinator
know.
of the Cleveland Browns, who was the
Right.
first interview for this job.
The
So
only
funny.
Dan, the only reason I was guessing Dan Pitcher is because once we stopped recording yesterday, you made a comment that you keep forgetting about Dan Pitcher. So I remembered that little comment you made.
Oh, okay.
I do. And like Mary Kay, what's interesting about him is he's got that previous relationship with Andrew. He's got that scouting background, right?
Yeah.
I don't think he was the play caller in Cincinnati. I'm fairly certain about that. I know it was always a little nebulous with Brian Callahan down there when he was the OC and Zach Taylor was, sometimes Zach was calling plays, or maybe then it was Brian Callahan, but he's just an interesting candidate to me. Just because of that relationship with Andrew and because he is sort of flying under the radar while everyone's getting really interested in Grant Udinsky and we're talking about these defensive guys. Dan Pitcher's just kind of there. And I don't know. It just makes me think like we're going to forget about him a little bit. And then a week from now, we're going to be sitting at his introductory press conference.
I really like Dan Pitcher. I've done some diligence on Dan Pitcher, and I really, really like him. I like the way he's come up in the game. I like the way his mind works. I like his scouting background. I like his personality. Now, the thing about Dan Pitcher is, once again, he is working with an established, amazing, excellent quarterback in Joe Burrow. And it's easy to look really good when you're coaching Joe Burrow. So I think it's hard to figure out how good is he, or is it because in part he's coaching Joe Burrow? So not too sure about how that would all work out, but there are many, many things I like about Dan Pitcher. I really like the fact that he persevered through injuries and he really had to work hard to get this job, to break into the NFL. And he was so persistent about that. And, I just think he's a really cool guy, it seems like. And I think we would love working with him. I just have a feeling that he would be somebody that we would really enjoy covering. So I do like him a lot. But I think that Tommy also falls into that same bucket of a guy that interviewed early that we have forgotten about and also has something that no one else does, and that is experience in coaching Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah. And like the thing with Pitcher is, again, it was Zach Taylor calling the plays and he had Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and like you were saying, he's got this super talented offense. Now, obviously they don't have much of an offensive line, so that would feel familiar to him when he arrived here. But I don't know, Ashley, I can't, that's what makes this hard, right? Like part of it is it's almost like a quarterback in the draft, right? Like Julian Saint's going to come out next year and everybody's going to say, well, yeah, he was throwing to Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate and all, like, of course he looked awesome. Well, of course the offensive coordinator for the Bengals is going to look good because he's got these stars, but there's also the element of maybe he is just really good. And it's the other stuff we've been talking about. Can he be a leader? Can he stand in front of that room every day and address the team? Can he hold people accountable? Can he put out 10 fires a day? I mean, there's stuff that we just don't even know about him and what he can and can't handle that could lead to him getting the job.
Right. And I'm with Mary Kay. I mean, I think the most intriguing thing about Dan Pitcher right now is his scouting background. Like, that is such an amazing asset to him as he goes through this process and has that experience that not a lot of people in his position would. And you would be coming to a team that is trying to answer this big giant quarterback question that they've been trying to answer for decades, and are you up to that challenge? So that to me is part of why he's fascinating. And I think, like with any of these guys, if it is an offensive guy, I mean, outside of Mike McDaniel, who's obviously been a head coach before, there is an element of question there, right? I mean, even with the defensive guys, these younger defensive guys that aren't Jim Schwartz, there's an element of, hey, what is this guy going to look like in this role? And can he put out those fires? So there's going to need to be something they see there with anyone. But Dan Pitcher that's like part of the evaluation process through the interview. Like, is this guy really something? Does he have that certain X factor? Or do you just not know because he has these really great pass catchers and Joe Burrow and he hasn't really called plays? Like, that's the question. That's what you have to try to figure out.
Okay, so since Mary Kay, since you wrote the name down, and this was a guy I was thinking about too, let's spend a little bit of time on Tommy because we really haven't. And he was an early interview. He hasn't gotten, Jim Schwartz has had, he interviewed with Baltimore. He's gotten requests. Tommy has not. But we know he's interviewed for college jobs, things like that. So, like, is Tommy still in play for this thing? Like, why is it so quiet around him right now?
It's a great question. It is a great question. And I think he is still in play. I don't know for sure, but just because he interviewed so early, I think we've forgotten about him just in the same way that we sort of forgot about Dan Pitcher. It feels like a long time ago at this point. And I think, once again, it's part of the puzzle of putting this whole thing together. Who's going to be the head coach? Who's going to be the offensive coordinator? Who's going to be the defensive coordinator? And I think it's all still to be determined. If Jim gets the head coaching job, is Tommy going to stay? Or will he have an opportunity perhaps to go with Kevin Stefanski? That's a very real possibility. Kevin might want him, and Tommy might want to go take that opportunity. So we'll have to see how that all goes. But and sometimes if you don't get a head coaching job with the team that you have interviewed with, that you don't want to stay anymore. Now, I think Jim would, because he's so well established here as a defensive coordinator. I think he'd be okay. He's at a different point in his career. But I'm not so sure how Tommy would feel about all of that. So very curious to see how that all works out.
Yeah, and then we spent so much time talking about how much these guys like Jim, how much they like Tommy and all of that. But, when you decide to make this move at head coach, there's ripple effects. You could have stuck with Kevin and everything could have been fairly status quo, but they obviously decided that wasn't the path forward. And that might mean that a coordinator you really like, whether it's Jim or Tommy or some position coaches you really like, those guys might leave. Like, that's just the nature of the decision the Browns made. But Ashley, I don't know. I mean, like, if they Jim always felt like a common sense, hey, just promote him. Yeah, that makes sense. Tommy felt like more of a stretch, but if you're going to throw in guys like Grant Udinsky and, Nate Shieldhouse and some of these guys, certainly that's the path to also just say, you know what, we like Tommy enough that we're gonna bet on him too.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to imagine, and look, these guys are all professionals. We don't know exactly what Tommy Rees would be thinking, but like me sitting here from the outside, it would be a little weird for Tommy to stay if they would go and hire even like a Nate Shieldhouse who hasn't even been a coordinator. Like that is kind of like, okay, wow, like to Mary Kay's point about Tommy being where he is in his career, like he's sort of in that rising star track too. I think you would want to go somewhere where you feel like better about that chance at upward mobility. So that is certainly fascinating. And I agree. Look, they made their bed with this when they decided to move on from Kevin Stefanski. Like automatically there's going to be some kind of turnover, you would imagine, because if you really wanted to just keep those coordinators in place, just bring back Kevin in that CEO coach role and go from there. But they didn't. So that is, I think, interesting. And the other interesting thing about Tommy, Mary Kay mentioned this idea that he has a lot of experience with Shedeur Sanders. And we talked about this at length yesterday, like what this team's quarterback situation is going to be real difficult to get a top tier guy with the number 6 overall pick. So are you kicking the can down the road another year? Is Shedeur going to wind up being your starter? Is he going to start a majority of games? Like, we don't know that. But if it becomes a possibility, having someone who knows Shedeur Sanders, has spent a lot of time with him already, they could view as more valuable than really a lot of people on the outside who maybe aren't even considering that possibility right now.
Okay, so here's our plan for the pod here the next few days. Kind kind of off season. It's not really the off season because we're in the middle of a coaching search, but some of these weeks we're going to go 4 days. So if we need to pod, we'll pod, but you might not hear us again until Monday when we come back with a Hey Mary Kay edition of the podcast. So we're going to sort of play it by ear over the next day or two. Of course, a bunch of guys coming in for interviews or doing virtual interviews, whatever, for the Browns here in the next couple days. So just get subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen. Just search for Orange and Brown Talk. Hit subscribe. If we do pod Friday or over the weekend for some reason, you'll get that right on your feed as soon as I hit publish. You can also find us on YouTube. That's Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. And if you're not a Football Insider subscriber, Ashley was asking our Football Insiders who their favorite coach was, who their favorite candidate was, and got a lot of replies. So if you want to get involved with that, it's cleveland.com/Browns, the blue banner at the top of the page for all of that information. For Mary Kay and Ashley, I'm Dan. Thanks for listening, everybody.